carriage wheels clattered against the cobblestone streets of London as Isabella heartily pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the city she loved disappear behind her. The iron taste of betrayal sat heavy on her tongue, mixed with the bitter knowledge that her own blood had sold her like livestock at market. Her brother Marcus had signed the contract 3 weeks prior, trading his sister for the cancellation of gambling debts so enormous that 3 generations could not have repaid them. Duke Adrian Blackwood owned those debts now, and by extension, he owned her. Isabella was 23 years old, an age considered dangerously close to spinsterhood by society's cruel standards, but she had guarded that status jealously. She possessed copper-colored hair that caught sunlight like polished metal green eyes that observers said could freeze or burn depending on her temperament, and a mind that had been educated far beyond what was considered proper for women of her station. Her father, before his death 5 years earlier, had been a professor of literature and philosophy who had raised his daughter as he would have raised a son, filling her head with radical ideas about equality, freedom, and the rights of individuals to determine their own destinies. Those ideas had made Isabella unmarriageable in the traditional sense. She had refused every suitor her mother had presented, seeing through their polite words to the cages they offered. Marriage, as she understood it from observation, was merely legal slavery dressed in white lace and orange blossoms. Women became property, their money absorbed into their husbands' accounts, their children owned by law by their fathers, their very bodies no longer their own. Isabella had sworn she would never willingly enter such bondage, and she had kept that promise to herself. But her brother's weakness had stolen her choice, and now she rode toward Blackwood Hall, toward a man she had never met, toward a future she had spent her entire adult life trying to avoid. Duke Adrian Blackwood was a figure of legend in London society, though the legends varied wildly depending on who told them. Some called him a brilliant strategist who had tripled his inherited wealth through shrewd investments in railways and shipping. Others whispered that he was cold as winter ice, a man who had never been seen to smile, who ran his vast estates with mechanical efficiency but no warmth. The dowagers clutched their fans and murmured about the scandal 10 years past, when his young wife had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving him a widower at 25 with a reputation shadowed by questions that were never quite answered. He was 35 now, and in the decade since his wife's death, he had never courted another woman, never shown interest in remarrying, never given any indication that he possessed human emotions beneath his aristocratic reserve. Yet he had purchased Marcus Hartley's debts from every creditor in London, consolidating them into a sum so staggering that repayment was impossible, and then he had demanded Isabella as payment. The why of it consumed her thoughts during the 2-day journey to his estate in Northumberland. Marcus had been too drunk and too ashamed to provide answers, and their mother had simply wept, useless as always when faced with any difficulty larger than choosing fabric for curtains. Isabella had gone to Duke Blackwood's London residence to confront him directly, to demand an explanation or perhaps to appeal to whatever humanity might exist beneath his reputation. But he had already departed for the north, leaving instructions that she was to follow within the week. Blackwood Hall emerged from the moorland like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and towering walls, windows that reflected the gray sky like blind eyes. The architecture spoke of centuries, of power accumulated and maintained through generations, of a family that had weathered civil wars and political upheavals by being harder and colder than their enemies. Isabella descended from the carriage with her spine straight and her expression composed, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She would not give this man the satisfaction of seeing her fear. If she must be a prisoner, she would be an unbroken one. The household staff assembled in the entrance hall were eerily silent, their faces carefully neutral as the housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Winters, led Isabella through corridors lined with portraits of Blackwood ancestors, who all seemed to share the same ice-blue eyes and unsmiling mouths. Her rooms were in the east wing, Mrs. Winters explained, a suite that had been prepared according to the Duke's specific instructions. The apartments were more beautiful than Isabella had expected, furnished with obvious expense, but also with surprising taste. There were books, she noticed immediately, shelves of them lining one wall of the sitting room. The bedroom beyond was decorated in shades of cream and gold, with windows that overlooked a wild garden where roses grew in glorious abandon. "The Duke requests your presence at dinner at 8 o'clock," Mrs. Winters said, her tone suggesting this was a command rather than an invitation. "A maid will come to help you dress at 7:30." Isabella waited until the housekeeper departed before she allowed herself to examine her surroundings more carefully. The books were not decorative volumes chosen for their bindings, but well-worn copies of poetry, philosophy, and contemporary novels. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the writing desk, and the drawers contained fine paper, ink, and pens. The wardrobe held gowns in her size, in colors that would complement her coloring, cut in styles that were both current and flattering. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. At precisely 8 o'clock, Isabella descended the grand staircase wearing a deep emerald gown that one of the silent maids had laid out for her. She had refused assistance with her hair, pinning it up herself in a severe style that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw. Duke Adrian Blackwood stood in the drawing room with his back to the door, studying a painting that depicted a naval battle. He turned as she entered, and Isabella experienced a shock of recognition that made no logical sense, as though some part of her had been expecting him all her life. He was tall, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples despite his relative youth, and yes, those ice-blue eyes that seemed to see through polite facades to the truth beneath. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in an austere way that suggested classical marble sculptures rather than warm flesh. He wore evening dress with the unconscious elegance of someone born to such formality, but there was something in the way he held himself that spoke of contained power, of strength deliberately restrained. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice a deep baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Thank you for joining me." "Did I have a choice?" Isabella replied, her tone edged with ice to match his eyes. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. "Please sit. Dinner will be served shortly, but I thought we should speak privately first." Isabella remained standing. "If you expect me to play the role of grateful rescued maiden, Your Grace, I must disappoint you. I am here because my brother is a weak fool and you are a man who apparently collects people along with your other investments. I have no intention of pretending otherwise." Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Isabella forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. Finally, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Good," he said simply. "I was worried you might be docile." The comment was so unexpected that Isabella momentarily lost her composure. "I beg your pardon." "Sit down, Miss Hartley, please. This will be easier if you are not glaring at me like an avenging fury, magnificent though the effect may be." Isabella sat, primarily because her knees had gone unreliable. "You are not what I expected." "Nor are you, though in your case I knew what to expect. I have been observing you for quite some time." The admission should have alarmed her, but instead, Isabella felt a strange calm settle over her. "Explain yourself, Your Grace. Why have you brought me here? If you wanted a wife, London is full of suitable young women who would have you without the need for financial coercion." Adrian moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of wine, offering one to Isabella before settling into the chair across from her. "What do you know of my first marriage, Miss Hartley?" "Rumors only. That your wife died young, that there were questions, that you have avoided the subject for a decade. The truth is both simpler and more complicated than the gossip suggests. Catherine was 17 when we married, the daughter of an earl who saw me as a solution to his financial difficulties. I was 25 and foolish enough to believe that duty and compatibility were sufficient foundations for marriage. Catherine was a gentle creature, sweet-natured and obedient, everything society claimed a wife should be." He paused, staring into his wine glass as though seeing the past reflected there. "She was also utterly miserable. I did not understand at first. I gave her everything she could possibly want materially, I treated her with courtesy and respect, I made no unreasonable demands. But she withered like a plant kept from sunlight. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped engaging with life itself. The doctors called it melancholia and prescribed various useless treatments. I called in specialists from Edinburgh and London, but nothing helped." Isabella felt an unexpected sympathy stirring beneath her anger. What happened? One morning, I found her in the conservatory. She had taken laudanum, a massive dose. She left a letter explaining that she could not bear to be possessed, that marriage felt like being buried alive, that she knew I meant no cruelty, but that kindness within a prison was still imprisonment. She thanked me for trying to be good to her and apologized for being too weak to survive. The raw pain in his voice was undeniable, and Isabella found herself revising her assumptions about this man. I am sorry for your loss. I was devastated, Adrian continued. But more than grief, I felt rage at myself, at the system that had put her in that position, at the laws that gave me ownership of another human being simply because we had spoken vows. I spent 10 years studying, thinking, trying to understand how to prevent such tragedy. I read philosophy, including your father's published works on individual liberty and moral philosophy. I corresponded with reformers and radicals. I came to understand that marriage as currently constituted is fundamentally unjust, particularly for women. Isabella set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. Then, why participate in it? Why drag me here against my will if you understand the injustice? Because I wanted to offer you something different, Adrian said, leaning forward with sudden intensity. Your brother's debts gave me leverage, yes, but I did not purchase them to acquire you as property. I purchased them to give you a choice. What choice? I am here. The contracts are signed. The contracts can be unsigned, Adrian said quietly. I brought you here to make you an offer, Miss Hartley. A proposal, if you will, but not the traditional kind. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. I am listening. Adrian rose and retrieved a leather portfolio from his desk, opening it to reveal legal documents covered in dense text. I have had my solicitors draw up papers that would create what I call a marriage of partnership rather than ownership. If you agree to marry me, you will retain complete control of any property or money you possess or inherit. You will have an independent income provided by me, but managed entirely by you, sufficient to live comfortably should you choose to leave. Any children would be considered equally under the guardianship of both parents, with neither having absolute authority. You would have your own apartments, your own pursuits, your own life. I would make no demands on your person or your time beyond what you willingly chose to give. Isabella stared at him, searching for the deception, the hidden trap. Why would you offer such terms? What could you possibly gain? Companionship, perhaps, intellectual partnership. The chance to prove that marriage need not be tyranny. And if I am being entirely honest, the hope that a woman of intelligence and fire might choose to share her life with me not because law compels her, but because she wishes to. You are mad, Isabella breathed. Possibly, Adrian acknowledged. But I am also serious. I am offering you a choice, Miss Hartley. Sign these papers and become my wife under these terms, with full legal protections that my solicitors assure me will stand up in any court. Or refuse, and I will forgive your brother's debts anyway, and provide you with sufficient funds to establish yourself independently wherever you wish. You are not my prisoner. You never were. The carriage that brought you here can take you back to London tomorrow if that is your desire. Isabella felt tears burning behind her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. This is some sort of test. You expect me to refuse, to prove some point about female nature or pride. I expect nothing, Adrian said gently. I hope, but I do not expect. Take time to consider. Read the documents, have them reviewed by any solicitor you trust. Ask me any questions. The choice is entirely yours, and there is no wrong answer. The dinner that followed was a surreal experience. Adrian proved to be surprisingly easy to talk with once the initial tension dissolved. He had read her father's work extensively and could quote passages from memory, engaging Isabella in the kind of intellectual debate she had not enjoyed since her father's death. He asked her opinions on politics, literature, and philosophy, and actually listened to her answers, challenging her points with respect rather than condescension. Over the following weeks, a strange sort of courtship developed, though it resembled nothing Isabella had ever witnessed or imagined. Adrian made no demands, no assumptions. Some days they barely saw each other, pursuing separate interests in different wings of the vast house. Other days they would spend hours in the library, debating ideas or reading in comfortable silence. He showed her his estates, explained his business ventures, asked her advice on matters of tenant welfare and agricultural improvements. Isabella discovered that Adrian had been implementing progressive reforms on his lands for years, building schools, improving housing, providing medical care. He employed women in positions of authority, paid fair wages, and listened to complaints with genuine attention. The people who worked for him did not fear him, she realized. They respected him. She also discovered, somewhat to her dismay, that she enjoyed his company. Adrian possessed a dry wit that caught her off guard, and beneath his reserved exterior was a man of deep feeling who had learned to guard his emotions after they had been weaponized against him. He loved music but could not carry a tune. He was hopeless at cards, but brilliant at chess. He rode like a centaur and swam in the cold northern lakes with what Isabella considered insane enthusiasm. One afternoon, she found him in his study reviewing the marriage contracts, with a frown creasing his brow. "Second thoughts, Your Grace?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Only about whether I have made the terms generous enough. My solicitor suggests I am being recklessly idealistic, but he is a conservative old bore who believes women should not own property at all." Isabella entered the study and took the chair across from his desk, a position that had become familiar. "Why are you really doing this, Adrian? And please do not give me noble speeches about justice and philosophy. What do you want?" He was silent for so long that Isabella thought he might not answer. Finally, he set down his pen and met her eyes directly. "I am lonely, Isabella. I have been lonely for 10 years, surrounded by people but connected to none of them. When I read your father's work, I felt I had found a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the world is broken and needs mending. When I made inquiries and learned he had a daughter who shared his intellect and convictions, I became curious. When I observed you refusing suitors and defending your independence despite enormous social pressure, I became fascinated. When your brother's foolishness gave me an opportunity to meet you, I took it, even knowing the method was ethically questionable." "Ethically questionable?" Isabella repeated with a raised eyebrow. "You orchestrated my abduction." "I gave you an escape route from a family that would have eventually worn down your resistance and forced you into an unwanted marriage anyway," Adrian countered. "Your mother had already begun negotiating with Lord Pemberton, a man 3 times your age with a reputation for cruelty. Would you have preferred that alternative?" Isabella felt cold. She had not known about Pemberton, but she could easily believe it. "No," she admitted quietly. "I am not a good man, Isabella," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am manipulative and calculating, and I have used my wealth and power to bend circumstances to my will. But I swear to you that I want your happiness, your freedom, your flourishing. If that happens with me, I will count myself the most fortunate of men. If it happens without me, I will content myself with having helped make it possible." Isabella stood and moved to the window, looking out over the wild gardens she had come to love during her weeks at Blackwood Hall. She thought about the life she had left behind in London, the constant battles with her mother and brother, the social pressure that ground down resistance like water wearing away stone. She thought about the future she had imagined for herself, independent but alone, always fighting for space to simply exist. Then she thought about what Adrian was offering. Not ownership but partnership. Not a cage, however gilded, but genuine freedom within a structure of mutual respect and support. "I have conditions," she said without turning around. "Name them." "I want to establish a school for girls on the estate, teaching not just needlework and deportment, but mathematics, science, and philosophy. I want to fund scholarships for girls whose families cannot afford education. I want to use my position as a Duchess to advocate for legal reforms that protect women's rights to property and custody of their children." "Granted all of it," Adrian said immediately. "I will provide funding and use my influence to support your efforts. What else?" Isabella turned to face him. "I want honesty between us always. If you find my company tiresome or if your feelings change, I want to be told directly rather than enduring polite pretense." "The same courtesy extended to you," Adrian agreed, "though I cannot imagine finding you tiresome. Challenging, certainly, infuriating at times, I expect, but never tiresome. I want separate bedrooms, and the understanding that physical intimacy, should it ever occur, is freely chosen rather than marital obligation." Adrian's expression became very serious. Isabella, I want to be absolutely clear about this. I will never, under any circumstances, demand or expect physical intimacy from you. If such closeness develops between us naturally, over time, because we both desire it, that would be a gift I would treasure. But it is not a condition of our marriage, not an obligation, not an expectation. Your body is your own always. Isabella felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Then I accept your proposal, Adrian. I will marry you under the terms you have offered. The wedding took place quietly a month later in the estate chapel, witnessed by a small gathering of staff and tenants who had come to respect both the Duke and his unusual bride. Isabella wore a gown of ivory silk that she had chosen herself, simple and elegant, with her copper hair dressed in loose curls threaded with white roses from the garden. As she spoke her vows, looking into Adrian's ice-blue eyes, Isabella felt no sense of imprisonment, no weight of chains. Instead, she felt possibility opening before her like a road stretching toward an unknown but promising horizon. The marriage settlement was signed and witnessed, legal documents that revolutionary lawyers would later cite as precedent in arguments for women's property rights. Isabella became Duchess of Blackwood with her independence intact, her voice preserved, her future her own to shape. The months that followed were a revelation. Isabella threw herself into establishing her school, discovering that Adrian had not merely granted permission, but had been planning for it, setting aside buildings and funds, recruiting teachers who shared their progressive views. Together, they became known as eccentric reformers, attracting criticism from conservative quarters but also admiration from those who longed for social change. Their partnership deepened into genuine friendship. Adrian proved to be a man of his word in every particular, respecting Isabella's boundaries while offering support that never veered into control. He celebrated her victories, commiserated with her frustrations, and challenged her thinking without dismissing her conclusions. Isabella found herself looking forward to their evenings together, to debates that ranged across every conceivable topic, to comfortable silences broken by shared laughter at some absurdity in the newspaper or a book they were reading. She caught herself watching him sometimes, noticing the way concentration made him bite his lower lip, how he rubbed his temple when wrestling with a difficult problem, the rare but devastating effect of his smile. One evening, nearly a year after their wedding, Isabella found Adrian in the conservatory where his first wife had died. He stood among the orchids and ferns, staring at nothing, lost in memory. "This room holds ghosts for you," Isabella said softly, joining him. "Yes," Adrian admitted, "but perhaps it is time to lay them to rest. Catherine deserves to be remembered with peace rather than guilt." "You gave her what mercy you could," Isabella said. "You learned from tragedy and tried to prevent its repetition. She would appreciate that, I think." Adrian turned to her, and in his eyes, Isabella saw something that made her pulse quicken. "I need to tell you something, and I fear it may upset the balance we have achieved." "Tell me anyway," Isabella said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I love you," Adrian said simply. "Not as a friend or a partner, though you are both those things. I love you as a man loves a woman, completely and irrevocably. I think I have loved you since the first evening when you stood in my drawing room and refused to be cowed. But I also know that love can be a burden rather than a gift if it comes with expectations or demands. So I tell you this not to pressure you or to change the terms of our arrangement, but because honesty is what we promised each other, and I am tired of hiding what I feel." Isabella felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were not tears of distress. "You impossible, infuriating, wonderful man, do you not see? I love you too. I have been fighting the feeling for months, telling myself it was gratitude or friendship or anything other than what it actually was. But I love you, Adrian. I love your integrity and your kindness and your brilliant mind. I love the way you listen and the way you challenge me and the way you have given me everything I needed to flourish." Adrian closed the distance between them, cupping her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you, Isabella? Not as duty or obligation, but because we both wish it." "Yes," Isabella whispered, and when his lips met hers, it was nothing like the cold transaction she had always imagined marital affection to be. It was warmth and connection, desire freely given and joyfully received. Their relationship transformed again, adding physical intimacy to intellectual and emotional partnership. But the foundation remained unchanged. Mutual respect, genuine equality, freedom preserved rather than surrendered. Years passed, and Isabella became one of the most influential women in England, not through her husband's position, but through her own efforts. Her schools multiplied, educating hundreds of girls who would have otherwise been denied knowledge. Her advocacy helped push through legal reforms that began, slowly, to dismantle the structures that treated women as property. Adrian supported every endeavor, using his wealth and influence to amplify her voice rather than overshadow it. Together, they raised 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, teaching them that partnership was stronger than domination, that love without freedom was mere possession. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isabella and Adrian sat in the library where they had spent so many evenings, watching snow fall over the gardens through the tall windows. "Do you regret the unconventional path we chose?" Adrian asked, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. Isabella considered the question seriously. "I regret nothing except that I cannot convince more men to follow your example. The world would be better if husbands understood that their wives are partners to walk beside rather than property to control." "Change is coming," Adrian said. "Slowly, but it is coming. We are part of that change, you and I." "We are," Isabella agreed, then smiled. "Though I still maintain that you were absolutely mad to make such an offer to a woman you barely knew." "The best decision of my life," Adrian said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "My beautiful, brilliant, fierce Isabella, you are everything I hoped for and so much more than I deserved." "We deserve each other," Isabella corrected. "We built this together, something new and better than what existed before. That is no small thing." In the years that followed, their marriage became the stuff of legend, held up by reformers as proof that equality between spouses was possible, and by conservatives as evidence of dangerous radicalism. Neither Isabella nor Adrian particularly cared about external opinions. They had created something precious and rare, a union based on freedom rather than bondage, on choice rather than compulsion, on love that enhanced rather than diminished the individuals who shared it. When Adrian died at 75, still sharp-minded and devoted to his wife until his final breath, Isabella grieved deeply but without regret. They had built a life together that honored both of them, and the legacy of their partnership continued through their children and grandchildren, through the institutions they had founded, through the laws they had helped to change. Isabella lived another 15 years, continuing her advocacy work until her own death at 88. In her final letter to her granddaughters, she wrote, "Never accept a cage, no matter how beautifully decorated. Demand partnership, equality, and freedom. Settle for nothing less than love that celebrates rather than confines you. Your grandfather showed me that such love was possible, and I have spent my life trying to make it possible for more women. Continue that work. The world needs you to be brave." Now I turn to you, dear story lovers, and ask for your reflections. How do you feel about Adrian's methods of bringing Isabella to his estate, even with honorable intentions? Was his manipulation justified by his goals, or does the end not excuse the means? Could you have forgiven such deception as Isabella did, or would you have refused his offer on principle? What do you think about Isabella's choice to enter marriage despite her philosophical objections to the institution? Did she compromise her values, or find a way to live them authentically within an imperfect system? How would you have handled Adrian's confession of love if you valued your independence as fiercely as Isabella did? Do you believe their story is romantic fantasy or a blueprint that could work in reality? Share your thoughts, your criticisms, your hopes, and tell me what you would have done differently had you stood in their shoes, facing their choices and navigating their complicated path toward partnership and love.